Andy, Sat Sri Akal, Ji Aayan nu. We're very, very happy to present today's speaker, who is called Rav Singh, or Ranveer Singh, from London. And he's going to be talking to us on the topic from Rawalpindi to London. Now, Rav Singh has been collecting all kinds of memorabilia for, well, since the 1990s, since he was quite young, collecting postcards, stamps, newspaper articles, all sorts of interesting memorabilia that he's built up quite a collection. And soon after, well, later on, he started helping with Punjabi classes and doing little history sessions at Punjabi classes here in London. And then he started walking tours around London. So walking tours, looking at the London sites, looking at the interesting landmarks in London that have some kind of connection to the Sikh community. And so he's built up a really nice collection of walks and talks around London. And in addition to that, he's been doing coach trips around the country and also trips abroad into Europe to have to see some of the war memorials and other interesting sites related to the Sikhs. So this is going to be a very fascinating talk, and he's collected a number of items from Rawalpindi, photographs and so on, that he's going to be able to show us today. So over to you, Rav.
Right, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen here. So if it's okay, Bobby, you can tell me, you can see my screen?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Okay. So thank you for that introduction. Yes, I'm Ranveer, or Rav Singh. We have a little organisation called A Little History of the Sikhs. And it's all really about museum collections that can be kept flat. So I collect lots of newspaper articles from 1840s onwards, stamps, postcards, images, art. But I think my collection's different from others, that it's not in 3D. So I don't collect weapons, statues, or artifacts that I haven't got the space to exhibit. So when Bobby asked me to prepare a talk, I thought it'd be interesting to go through my collections and pick out aspects and connected with West Punjab or WHITEHALL. And then we focused in on Rawalpindi and then moving to Lahore. So in the first half of this talk, we'll be looking at some aspects from the collections in the museums you see behind me from Rawalpindi. And then we'll move into what I showcase on the tours. If we look at Lahore in London. So first we'll look at Rawalpindi in my collections, and then we'll move on to artifacts from Lahore that you can find on the streets of London. Now, I have followed this association for some time, and there are some notable people here. So I'm quite interested to hear that because of your history and heritage in the UK, I'm sure that some of you know some of these places that I will talk about, but towards the end, I will hopefully be interested to learn if you've learnt about anything new. I know that everyone's on mute, but if it's okay, Bobby, shall I do a little bit of Punjabi and English, or mainly English, I think is okay?
Yes, yeah, as you feel comfortable.
Yeah. So mainly English, and then we'll bring in some Punjabi if I think it's appropriate. So the way A Little History of the Sikhs started, like Bobby said, was basically a collector. And I think all collectors become educators because they like to share their passion for their collections. And I was given that opportunity in a Punjabi school in East London. So when they had the kids who found it difficult to pay attention to Punjabi, they used to put them in a class with me and say, Baji, tusi inanu padha do. And it was difficult because they were not studious students. They were the more students who needed a little bit more care and attention. So I used to bring in aspects from my collections and talk about historical and tell stories of history. And then I used to take them on tours into London on Saturday mornings, take them in, show them, and try and bring them kind of passion for history. That seemed to work a little bit. And then they were called Monopoly tours in those days. And we used to go around with the Monopoly board. And then we started doing the tours publicly. So it's called A Little History of the Sikhs, basically because of the link between telling little stories to little children. But today we're going to focus in the first half of the presentation around where I think a number of the people in this meeting are from. And that's from the WHITEHALL region of Punjab, of West Punjab, which on the map here is shown in green, is in Pothohar, in the map of Pakistan. And if we zoom in a little bit, it was a learning journey for me after a couple of months, because it was interesting to hear that Rawalpindi was the initial capital of Pakistan in the new nation of Pakistan. So I was quite interested to learn that. And then obviously now being kind of an extension of Islamabad and its proximity to Lahore is probably the interesting way I can bring this into the connections with London. So we have Rawalpindi within Islamabad, not too far from Lahore. And I think many of you probably know this from your own history and heritage. So in today's hour or so, we will look at Pothohar, Rawalpindi, Lahore, and London. So as I said first, we'll look at some of the items I have in my collections that you might be able to see behind me. So basically, I was going to focus on early 19th century postcards. So these postcards are of Rawalpindi, 1900 to 1920, I think, from the publishers. And I've got about 100 of these postcards, different ones from Lahore and Rawalpindi. So I just thought I'd share some of the more colourful ones with you. So this is your Rawalpindi about 100 years ago. The park is a postcard of the park in Rawalpindi. And also this was quite an interesting one. This is a city view of Rawalpindi in black and white. So what they used to have is these black and white postcards, and then later these same postcards were colorized and they came out again in a color format later. So this is a view of Rawalpindi, a general city view. Just moving on to the next one here. This is the West Ridge. So again, you always have the Pothohar hills or the plains in the background on many of these postcards with these ridge views. And I'm sure, as Bobby has told me, some of you have been to Pothohar, and that's probably one of the landscapes that you're familiar with. Just moving on to the barracks. So as we know, it was a military base in Pakistan for a long time, proximity to Islamabad. And even now, I think I read it is the headquarters for the Pakistan Army, it's still Rawalpindi. But this is the British cavalry barracks from about 100 years ago. And this one is the Sadr Bazaar. I tried to bring these photos like 100 years ago to today, but when I looked at Sadr Bazaar today, it was purely like one of the Indian markets that I see, full of shops, crammed full of cables and wires and shops and overheads. So I couldn't get a kind of a corresponding image. But this is what Sadr Bazaar used to look like 100 years ago. And interestingly, with the shop fronts, they used to have these curtains that used to open up. There's all these little stories that I find from places like Punjab, and I can imagine those stories fitting into this scenery. One of them is really that when the shops used to open up in the morning, we say "Borni that time" in the markets in India, they say "Borni that time," first customer is your "Borni that time." In Punjab, basically all these shops, I think, used to put a chair outside their shop. And basically your first customer would come and sit on the chair, yeah? And that would be your borni. That would be your first customer of the day. Then, because you've had your first customer of the day, you would put the chair inside after your first customer. And then the next shop, if their chair is still out, they would buy their items from the next shop because that's borni the time for them. And once all the chairs will come in, that means that every shopkeeper has now made their first sale of the day, and it will be a good day. And the business can flourish in the market. Now, for me, those kind of stories are quite interesting because that's like, there's a bit of shopkeepers are given probably a negative connotation about being money hungry, but there every shopkeeper was looking out for each other to make sure everyone has a good start to the day. And even now you go to Punjab, if you go in the morning like we do, because we're trying to get out of the sun, they're always trying to sell you in Borni, but they don't put a chair out for you. They're not looking out for anyone else these days. So no, I just want to tell that story here. I'm just moving on some more postcards. These churches, there are a couple of churches in Rawalpindi that are quite historic and quite famous. And I couldn't find the corresponding angles for the churches here, but this is an image of the church 100 years ago. Quite quaint, very British style of architecture. And another church in Rawalpindi from another angle there. be interested to hear later if any of you have visited these and can tell me exactly the name of these churches. And this one was called the Club. This is a club in Rawalpindi. So again, military connections, leisure activities were generally held around clubs. And this is how the club was presented on a postcard from 100 years ago. So I think, so just moving from Rawalpindi, I've got a lot more postcards about Lahore. And obviously these are some of the more iconic locations in Lahore. So this is the tomb of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, presented on a postcard. The last one I wanted to pick up is the Zamzama. So the Zamzama, which is Kipling's garden, it's featured on books in Rudyard Kipling, a huge cannon from the Sikh missile period, now on display on a roundabout, I think, in Pakistan, in Lahore. But I know that where the Zamzama is now behind, there is the Pakistan. So when the British were there, we had churches, we had monuments, we had barracks, we had all of this kind of stuff being presented. And just switched off for a second. And for me, the tours are different for our younger generation because they cannot connect to Punjab or to India in the way that my father's generation or my grandfather's generation can, or you can, because you may have been there, you speak the language, you know, you're aware of your history and heritage. But for our younger generation who might be third, fourth or fifth generation British, Asian, British Sikh, they cannot connect to Punjab in the same way. So for me, the challenge has always been, how do I connect them through to Punjab, through which they can connect to their history, heritage, and ultimately to Gurbani? But can I do it in London? And that's been my challenge for the last 20 years. So this is what we do. We take groups to churches, memorials, buildings. We have good access. A lot of people work with me closely now. They'll open up their buildings for us. And we take groups. We do them in Punjabi, we do them in English, we do them in French and Italian if they want them in French and Italian. And we try and share a little history of the Sikhs on the streets of London. So in this part of the presentation, I think I'm going to show you the wealth of artifacts we have from Lahore on the streets of London. And I think for me, the interest is with a knowledgeable audience like yourself, were you even aware that we have so much? So let's start Sikh history on the streets of London. So here we are at the Royal Hospital in Chelsea. So this is near Sloane Square. There's a road called King's Road. So the King's Road is a road that leads you to Chelsea Football Ground. Most people know, say if Chelsea ever win a trophy, then they take the bus down the King's Road. Yeah. So just off the King's Road is a road called the Royal Hospital Road. And the Royal Hospital, in the grounds of the Royal Hospital, is where the Chelsea Flower Show takes place. So every year the Queen goes and opens the Chelsea Flower Show. It's on BBC Two, and it's a major event in the socialite calendar. So this is the Royal Hospital. In here are 300 to 400 veterans from the services. They retire here, and this is their dining room on the bottom of this slide. So in their dining room, on the walls, along each desk, each dining table, is a military record of every engagement that the British Army have had. And it just goes on and on and on from the 1600s onwards, or even earlier. So these are the battles that are memorialized here, around here in the dining room, and they describe the Sikh wars. And most of these battles took place in and around West Punjab, so including Jallianwala. Yeah, so these are all recorded here. So if we say Jallianwala, Multan, Sabra, possibly, I'm sure, on the Pakistan side of modern day, the Indian subcontinent. So that's the Royal Hospital. But as we know, the Battle of Jallianwala was effectively a draw between the British and the Sikhs. And then the final battles at Gujarat and Punjab is when we conceded Punjab and it was annexed by the British. When you lose a battle, when you lose a war, you have to pay compensation. And that compensation also includes taking away all of your military power so that you cannot launch another war in a few years' time. So all the cannons that were used by the Sikh Empire in the Second Anglo-Sikh War were then confiscated by the British and were part of the compensation agreement in the treaty. And those cannons are also kept in Chelsea. So this is Maharaja Ranjit Singh's cannon. And they used to say 2 cannons captured at Jallianwala, 13th of January 1849. But I think we've been working with the experts and we feel now that it's 1 cannon is Punjab and 1 cannon is a copy of a very similar style. But they're in the grounds of the hospital where the the Chelsea Flower Show takes place, and they are accessible. So on our tours, we've now been given the key to the gardens to get through the gates, and we can go up close and personal to cannons of Ranjit Singh, which are on display. Now, the British who died in that battle, because they were basically annihilated, one of their divisions at Jallianwala, they have a memorial to about 250 of their soldiers. And that memorial, there's the hospital again, and that's called the Jallianwala Memorial, 1849, and it sits in the grounds of the Chelsea Hospital. Each one of their soldiers is named here, and each one, and that's the only memorial, I think, in the UK which has the names of each soldier who died at the hands of the Sikh armies. So for those British soldiers who served in Jallianwala, they were given the Punjab Medal. And in this medal, you see a scene of a British general, and he's pointing down, and the Sikhs here are laying down their shastras in a pile, again, collecting the weapons so they don't fight back on another day. Now, when we look at the Sikh records of that event, they also say that many of these soldiers who are featured in this medal here were actually saying at the same time that now the spirit of Ranjit Singh has died, when they laid down those weapons to the British in 1849. Now, just going next door from the Royal Hospital, so this is in the Royal Hospital, which is the only green space we have in Chelsea. It's huge, but there is no other green space in Chelsea. So we have the cannons, the memorial, the medals, and the records in the dining room. So that's a nice visit for us to go on our tours. But next door, which is literally right next door, is the National Army Museum. Now, this museum used to be where they used to keep all the records of various regiments to do with the army. And it is a national museum. So from across the country, all the Welsh regiments, the Kent regiments, etc. They have regimental museums in their areas, but the national records are kept here. And this is where I used to go years and years ago. And they used to have a huge range of books on Punjab, which were usually loaned out to some people on permanent loan. They never used to give them back, I think. So it was difficult to get the right books from Punjab. But then pre-2014, they were given a lot of money by the National Lottery, and they then reopened towards the end of the First World War, 100th centenary. So from 2014 to 2018, it went through a renovation period, and now it has huge galleries, really nicely presented. Lots of light comes into the museum. I remember in the old days here, they didn't even have toilets for their people who were researchers. And now they've got a children's centre in their galleries, restaurants, everything. And they have a Punjab gallery. So you go downstairs on permanent display. They have lots of items from Lahore to do with shastras, weapons. They have a Dastar Bunga on display as well. And they also have a curator who's of Sikh heritage, Jasdeep Singh. And what he has managed to do, he has managed to put the Sikh military valor, Sikh military stories, and embedded them in all the different galleries. So if you look at uniforms, you'll see that the star in the uniforms. If you look at medals section, you'll see the medals. And then on the ground floor in the basement, you have a pure gallery just of Punjab with the star, the shield, and the swords here as well from the Maharaja Ranjit Singh period. So it's quite an interesting place to visit. It's one of the smaller museums that are not really known in London. So just moving on to one of the museums that is quite well known in London is this museum. Now, if you've been here with relatives or with your family, you're going there to see the dinosaurs, right? So you're going to go to the Natural History Museum in South Kensington to see the huge dinosaurs. But if you go to this section of the museum, you go downstairs into the basement, they have something called the vault. And the vault is basically mineralogy and anything to do with stones. And this nicely introduces us to a part of, this is my added value, Bobby, because basically everyone goes to the Tower of London to look for the Kohinoor, and they take your Indian relatives or friends from India to see the Kohinoor. You pay all that money, which I think if I'm paying on a credit card, you won't have change of £200, right? Because you're taking 5 or 6 people from India to see the diamond. And they're not interested in the Tower of London, the 1,000 years of history, the reigns. They just want to see the Kohinoor. They only want to see the Kohinoor. So instead of now taking them to the Tower of London, please just take them to the Natural History Museum, because they have a better example. Because in the Tower of London, you have to go on a conveyor belt. You know, you can't get up close and personal to the crown. But if you go downstairs into the vault, there you go. You can see that. You can see the Kohinoor diamond in the Mughal cut. So this is what the Mughal cut that Maharaja Ranjit Singh had on his arm. And then you have the British cut, which was done by Prince Albert on the right-hand side. And that's on a display cabinet. You can go zoom in, you can take your own photos. They are copies, obviously, but you can't tell the difference, you know, if you're going to just tag them on social media. And this is quite a happy experience, Bobby, because it costs you £0 to get in, and you can see dinosaurs for free, right? So literally, I go into the Tower of London, and they're not interested in anything else. They just want to tell you their stories of the Kohinoor and all of that stuff. It's quite depressing. So I just say, let's go somewhere else. But this is how the Kohinoor arrived in London. This is in the Royal Collection Trust. And the reason I wanted to bring this to the presentation is because, look, here's the Kohinoor, which was taken out and put like this. These were then also adapted, the smaller diamonds. But actually the silk here, the crystal, the enamel, the glasswork here, this is also a work of art. And this is also treasured by Queen Elizabeth's collection in the Royal Trust. And this is also, you know, that comes out on display sometimes, not often, but if it is on display, it'll be on royal jewellery and royal collections. And they've even treasured this from Lahore, from the Dosh Khanas in Lahore. So this is in the Buckingham Palace Royal Collection Trust from Lahore. And this is how it was worn by Ranjit Singh and Sher Singh. You can see them always wear it on their arm. So it was in an armlet fashion here. And this one of Sher Singh, I think he's wearing everything they had. The Kohinoor, sorry, it's on his left hand there. Plus the Timor rubies, swords. He's wearing a ruby emerald belt. And all of these items eventually found their way to London. This is the Victoria and Albert Museum in its original form. So basically this was subject to a big extension when Queen Victoria and Prince Albert celebrated a Jubilee, or in commemoration of Queen Victoria's Jubilee, they renamed the museum, but it was called the South Kensington Museum. And before that, they took over the collections of the East India Museum and brought them here to the Brompton Rooms. So this is where the artifacts from 1851 Great Exhibition would have been displayed. Now, most of you, or all of you, will know that in 1999, they did a major exhibition on the tercentenary of the Khalsa, the Arts of the Sea Kingdoms, which was a partnership with the Kapani collection. And they started to put on display and bring out a lot of the artifacts they have downstairs. So now we have a permanent Sikh galleries collection in the V&A, and they have all the items that I'm sure you are familiar with, because they do have the Multan throne, which is the Kursi of Lahore, octagonal design, gold-leafed wooden throne, and very splendid. And this is one of the most prized items in the Victoria and Albert Museum's own guide. You know, there used to be a time in the 80s, I think, Bobby, when they didn't have it encased, so you could sit on it yourself. You know, people in the early 80s used to say you could actually sit on there yourself and take a photo. But obviously, then they realised what it was, and now protect it, gold casing, glass casing. They also have the stars. They keep one of these are on display, the one on the left here. It's from Lahore, again taken from the treasuries in Lahore. And the one on the right is not on display, but a similar style of the star bungas. So we have the stars in Chelsea, we have the stars in South Kensington, and we'll also have the star elsewhere. I'll show you later. And this item also, they have a dowse. Now, dowse has been credited, they say at the V&A, many credit its invention to one of the great Sikh gurus. This is an amazing piece of musical heritage that we see at the V&A. They have a number of these instruments from North India. So they have a jodi, they'll have a saranda, sarangi, but the dowse in the description says great Sikh gurus. It's been credited to its invention. And for us, I think it's Guru Gobind Singh who we associate with the invention here. Very majestic instrument and a very good example here. Just going to take you across now to another lesser known place on the circuit, which is the WALLACE collection. So the WALLACE collection is basically a stately home. It's behind Selfridges off Oxford Street. So if you ever do frequent Selfridges, it's literally a 10-minute walk from there in a place called Manchester Square. Again, it's free entry, and they have a number of weapons on display. So it's basically a collection of armor and armory. And it is a nice trip, I think, for everyone. But they also have what they call the Shamsheed of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So this is a ceremonial sword, they say. It has an ivory or walrus ivory head. It has exquisite carvings inside, and then a Wootz steel blade from Syrian steel. And this is a close-up of it here. So you see the Lion of Punjab together with the motif of the flower here. They do sometimes, they allow permission to take it out of his cabinet, bring it into a room and allow groups to inspect it more closely wearing gloves. And that's all just about trying to connect people to their heritage, They're quite good to work with. But also the WALLACE collection, it's not just this. They have like another 50 swords from Punjab, armor plates, the stars, helmets in the shape of the stars, and kids and adults. It is quite interesting to connect to these items. So where am I up to now? 33. Okay, cool. I'm going to move on to Whitehall. So Whitehall is the government headquarters of all the different parties and offices. You're all familiar with all the departments, the Treasury, etc., Downing Street. They all come off that area. But if we go to Whitehall Place, which is a small road that runs off Whitehall, and it's called Whitehall Place, you see this, it's called the National Liberal Club. And in the National Liberal Club, so the Liberal Party was a party that emerged in the late 1850s onwards. And really at that time, you only had, in the late 19th century, the Conservatives who were landowners and the Liberals who believed in a little bit more equity for all. And this was their impressive headquarters because they had a prime minister in the 1880s. I'll come to him in a second. William Gladstone. And he was a prime minister who's probably he is the only British prime minister to serve 4 terms. So all the others that we're familiar with, the famous prime ministers, Thatcher, Blair, anyone else, they've served 3 terms. They never get their 4th term. So Gladstone had 4 terms in the 1880s through to the 1910s. He had a break in between. But the theory is that if you get 4 terms, then you can really start to implement your policies of your party. And the National Liberal Club was the headquarters of the National Liberal Party. And the National Liberal Party's ethos was about more like the Liberal Democrats of today. And when I've done a lot of government work, the way my 25 years in government work has been is really about they copy other places. So if you look at childcare, they try to copy Finland and Norway because they have high childcare outputs. If you look at low crime, they look at Bill Clinton's crime policies in America, see what worked in Chicago, and then they try to implement those. So for me, trying to tie in my government work, trying to tie in this work, it was all about what is going on at the National Liberal Club. So this was the party that started to clear the slums in East London, started to eradicate poverty in East London, and they started to invest in schools. And a lot of those schools were associated with the church. They tried to clear up Whitechapel. So you see a lot of churches, they used to have extensions of their schools for girls, education for girls. And it was this party that did that. So they have this staircase in the National Liberal Club, and there's Gladstone, because he is the only Prime Minister to serve 4 terms. And Churchill, you can see his painting there. Churchill was a Liberal in his first years, in his initial early years before he became a Conservative. And as you go up these steps, which are architecturally very impressive because that's what they look like from the top, you see it says the NLC, the National Liberal Club, and you go up and up and up. And as you go up, you see lots and lots of paintings of lords and people to do with the Liberals, you know, and people who made policy. And they were investing in change. Victorian London was rich. They had the money to be able to do these things, and they believed in kind of more like the Quakers, believed in a bit more of compassionate government. And when you get right to the top, and these are the rooms, very impressive, but you go right to the top, you see this. So you go right to the top of this staircase and you see Maharaja Dalip Singh's painting as a copy of the famous Winter Halter painting that's in the Isle of Wight. So when I first came across, I was just, what is this doing in the National Liberal Club? And then when we do our tours, we can see the painting. It is oil, it is dated around the same time that Winter Halter painted his. Dalip Singh, we're allowed access to go in and see the painting. And we're also allowed access to see a painting nearby next door. And this is a painting of Colin Mackenzie, Captain Colin Mackenzie. Captain Colin here is wearing his Mughal attire. He was born in India, I think, of Scottish heritage. He's basically buried in Edinburgh at the moment. He's in Edinburgh, his grave. But his picture right at the top, when you go up this staircase, you see this tower here. So when you get to about this level, you go round and round and round, and you see Queen Victoria, Prince Albert, Maharaja Dalip Singh, and Captain Colin Mackenzie. So this then starts to play all kind of ideas in my head, because you've got the paintings along this corridor, and I have 3 theories on this, and I'll share them because I think I have the time. So Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, yes, you'll have their paintings because they were the Queen and King or Prince Consort during the time of the building's construction. Dalip Singh is quite interesting because, as I said, policy, you need to have a reference point for policy. And if we look at the great Lahore Darbar ruled by Maharaja Ranjit Singh, it had a lot of liberal qualities. And I think people like Captain Colin Mackenzie and through Dalip Singh's painting, that was just in a way a small acknowledgement from the National Liberal Party that said, yes, we understand what you had in Lahore. We have modelled our policies on what you had in Lahore, because Lahore was a per capita, a very highly educated community. The villages in Lahore, through the women who taught through Gadas, these books that could teach you multiple languages, so you could read Gurbani in the multiple languages and become, you know, strong in your Sikhi and also strong in your soldier qualities. That all came from this system that Maharaja Ranjit Singh promoted in the villages. They had these 500 Gadhe. The Gadhe would teach Gurmukhi, Sanskrit, Persian, and then those 500 Gadhe, you educate a village, you pick the 500 Gadhe up and you move it to the next village. And in this way, he educated a lot of Punjab. So when the British arrived, the first thing they did in 1849 onwards was start to collect the Gadhe and to do what all empires do, was to try and retell history from their perspective. And they basically, no Gadha has survived, let's just say that. No Gadha has survived to this day, but a highly educated population. Now, Captain Colin Mackenzie, through the people I take on the tours and some historians who've been on the tours, they've also added to the narrative that he was also well versed in the Guru Granth Sahib. And it is said, and I'm trying to find the records, that he was the first person to bring the Guru Granth Sahib in the Gurmukhi format. So this is before we started to get the Trump and then the Macauliffe translations into English, because he could read Gurmukhi. He was from India, you know, he was born in Punjab. So he brought them here, and maybe he was a member of the National Liberal Club, and maybe he was trying to reference point Gladstone and the leaders of the time with references from the Guru Granth Sahib. So to me, this is my focus of research. It's really hard. I'm trying to do it, but if anyone here can help, then I'd be really grateful. And then obviously with the Dalip Singh there, that's another reference point to the Kingdom of Punjab, the secular state of that kingdom. And I think it's an acknowledgement to how liberal policy was shaped. That's why I find these tours so interesting, because in these hidden spaces, there's these hidden little histories, which I think need to be told. So that's here at the National Liberal Club. I think people like yourself, Bobby, and your people on the call, you know, if you go to the National Liberal Club, you sign in and you ask, just politely ask, if there's no politicians in the building, if security's okay, they will allow you to go up. They'll allow you to walk up the staircase and view the paintings for yourself. You might be close by, you know, you might be just in Trafalgar Square or Whitehall anyway. And I would just go, you know, the more Sikhs they see, the more they'll let in, basically. You know, that's my theory of that one, because I have to educate every guard. The doorman knows, the hotel know, the reception know, but I have to take groups and they have to look Sikh and then they'll let you in. And that's basically, you can't get into the Conservative club like this and you can't get to Labour HQ. Every time I go to the Liberal club, they let me in. So that's good. Right, so the British Museum. So in the past,
your camera doesn't seem to be working. The slides are working fine.
Okay.
But
well, that's okay. I'll carry on because I don't know why that connection.
That's fine.
Yeah. So the British Museum. This was again a collection. You know, there is that old joke. You know, there's nothing British in the British Museum because it was based on the collections of Mr. Sloane, who basically collected everything from around the world and his travels. You know, but they do have new Indian Sikh galleries upstairs. So the India galleries have been revamped. In the past, they only had a few coins on display, or actually one Sikh coin on display, and everything else was behind closed doors by appointment only. But now, through I think the last 10 years, they've had more interest in their items. They can track these things. You know, what are people looking for in the British Museum? And now I think it's worth taking a tour because it says they have Sikhism, life at the court and the art of storytelling between 1600 and 1900. And it says, Bao Kalam Karchit Likhari, Gurkuch Lik Vichar, Lik Naam, Salah Lik Antana Paravar. So they've actually put some Gurmukhi some Gurbani in the Sikh galleries. And they have 3 cabinets now. And this is one cabinet. And this features the Star Bunga, which was on temporary display in 2010. But it also has some more weapons. It has more than one coin now. It has 8 coins. Bairam Singh from Lahore, as an architect, is featured with some of his work, some materials. We also have opposite from the Peter Bance collection, a gold embroidered sari or sapphire Dalip Singh, which he inherited from Maharani Jind Kaur. So this is a heavy sari because it's made of gold thread. So we all know how heavy gold is, and finely woven. And I think that's quite an interesting bit from the suffragette movement. This picture here of Sophia is at Hampton Court. We know that she was the goddaughter of Queen Victoria. And she then basically helped to promote the message in the suffragette movement because it kind of brought embarrassment on the establishment to have a goddaughter of Queen Victoria on the front line with the suffragettes. And she was then memorialized in a stamp in 2018, in February 2018, on the 100th anniversary. So that was the first Sikh to be memorialized on a Royal Mail stamp. We just had a second one in 2020 in Victory in Europe series. So I thought that would be quite interesting to share. Getting towards the end of the locations, there were so many more, but we're just going to move to the British Library. So when we had partition, when we had independence in 1947, the India office had to close in Whitehall, and I have images of that, and they also have a Darbar in the India office, which is a working office. So the British Library had to adopt all the India office records, the India office photograph collection, the prints, drawings and paintings collection, private papers from families, the books and the Delhi collection. So all of these are actually with the British Library, and they have 14 kilometers of shelf space dedicated to just India pre and post partition. And when I did the check on Rawalpindi, 1,234 documents just on your part of the world, Bobby. So there's enough for your young scholars to get involved in and do some family history. 1,234. So I looked at just some images. And here we have a painting with a distant view of that ridge again, the WHITEHALL area of Rawalpindi. But this was by a painter called Sir Henry Legate. And what it's talking about is Rawalpindi being a Mughal base, then developed into a trading centre by the Sikhs, and then coming into the British in 1849 and being the army headquarters. So that's a painting that shows a very different Rawalpindi to the one that you probably know now. The next one I wanted to bring up is a stupa, which is associated, I think I learned from Bobby, to do with the Buddhists and their well, we know that the early Buddhist religion was in the WHITEHALL region. They have these images of an archaeological survey of India where they report about the Manikyala stupa, which is near Rawalpindi as well. This is in the British Library. And I just wanted to finish on this artifact in the British Library, which I think is quite interesting. I didn't pick up Jintan Kaur in this one as being a Lahore queen, but her Gudka is in the British Library. So what they said is the Granth was too large to be able to be copied for private devotion, is how the British describe it. So basically they're describing a Gudka. And these personal prayer books had 1 or 2 shabads, 3 or 4 shabads by the Gurus, and it would be a personal kind of Gudka. And this is the Maharani's Gudka, which is in the British Library now. These are the kind of tours we do. This is what we try to do, is to uncover these little histories. So Bobby, I think I can stop there and we're at 2:45. So if you want to open it up to the meeting, any comments? I just kind of feel we got a knowledgeable audience, so it'd be nice to just engage a little bit. And this is what we do. We have a website, we do the research, we try and publish papers, we do the tours, and we do the collections. On that note, Bobby, I think I'll hand back to you, if that's okay.
Yeah, well, thank you, Rav. That was really fascinating, actually. Just all of these different places in London that we just walk past, and they have such a history that we don't know about them. Actually, Rav, if you want to stop sharing your screen,
yeah, I'll do that.
what I can do is I can allow if someone has a question or a comment. If you want to either raise your hand on this. Oh, what's going on here? If anyone has a question or comment, please, you can unmute yourself and speak to us all. Good. Right. Sorry, I think there's a little issue here with the screen. What's going on?
Your screen?
Good. Yeah. Good. So if anyone has any questions, I mean, I've been on one of the tours that Rav organized, and I must say it was really, really fascinating. Yeah, Rami, do you want to?
As well.
Okay.
Hi.
Sorry, let Rami go first. Yeah.
Hi, thanks, Bobby. Hi, Sasika refugees. Excellent presentation, and it's really there's so many questions, but I'll ask one.
Okay.
Would you mind just explaining a bit more about the Gurmukhi coming into the UK and what it's the first time I heard this. I'm just so enthralled to understand, how did Gladstone, or what evidence do we have to say Gladstone took the Gurmukhi into account, and the British government at the time read the Guru Granth Sahib. Could you just...
Yeah, no problem. You can hear me, right? Bobby, you can hear me okay?
Yeah, so this is just camera doesn't seem to work, but we can hear you.
Yeah, no. So this is my theory based on multiple visits. So they have a similar copy of the portrait of Dalip Singh in the Conservative Club, and now it's been installed, I think, in the Labour HQ as well. But that's not my area of interest. My area of interest, particularly with the Liberal Party headquarters, I've been visiting for about 10 years. I can meet people there. It's not documented, Rami, but the thing is, it's next to, so you go up the staircase, and I've now mapped all the Liberals going up the staircase, right? They're all the great and the good. They've all done something. But the Liberal policies that they brought in were very aligned to the policies in Punjab that were being enacted by Ranjit Singh in the Punjab, especially to do with education, service to the poor, alleviation of poverty, etc. And what I'm saying is, when I work in government, we always look for a reference point. You're not going to launch a policy based without evidence. Yeah. If you're 1888 and you're in the National Liberal Club, it's only been 30 years since you took over the wealth of India, in Punjab. You took over the Punjab, which was a very, very rich state. They obviously, start my video, yeah. So they obviously understood Punjab because they were watching Punjab for 40, 45 years since 1810. And yes, I would like more evidence, but it's a theory that I'm trying to put together, and all I can do is go through documents. It's not going to be there in black and white. It's not going to be, we have copied this, because I can't even tell people that we copy crime policy from Chicago, right? I'm not even allowed to say that, so you can't say we copied, we're the British government here, Yeah. They always need a reference point. And the fact that you've got Dalip Singh together with Captain Colin Mackenzie, and Captain Colin Mackenzie was an Anglo-Indian. He was a British, but he was born in India. He could read the Gurmukhi. So if you're going to come to London and you're going to bring with you a Guru Granth Sahib, you're not going to do nothing with it. You're going to try and spread what the teaching. And it's only after that time, I think, that Trump started his poor translation, and then McCall lifted his better translation, and that was all around the same time. So for me, it's something I'm really trying to work up. But whether it's the time, the documents, the access, all of this stuff, and it's going to be having to put my head on the line and come up with a theory, right? And everyone will knock it down, fine. But all I'm saying is, this is what I'm learning over the last 10 years of going to these places, that it's very connected, but very under the radar.
That's fascinating. Thank you. I'll let other people ask. Fascinating, and good luck. Or keep going, because that's I think. And I'll end with this. The things that we find as humanity, as humans, as individuals, as so out there, as so extraordinary that it won't be real. They generally, the unusual turns out to be the normal things. The unusual turns out to be what actually happens in life. And I think because what you're saying, it sounds so extraordinary that the British government took on the Gurmukhi. I think
pieces of a jigsaw. I'm just trying to find the pieces, and whether they fit together and tell my story, fine. They'll fit together and tell a story. Whether it's my story, I don't know, or whether it's someone else's. It's just finding the pieces and connecting them. I need to go to Scotland, find out what Captain Colin Mackenzie, how many meetings did he have with the government, how influential was he, etc. But he was definitely a liberal, because his painting's there. The club is downstairs. We can be members of the club if that's our political allegiance. That's the way it works.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay. Actually, there was one question about Bhai Ram Singh, and actually, there's you mentioned, well, and actually, when I went along to the British Museum with you, it was great because you took us straight to the place rather than wandering around this huge museum. But so there's a little description about Bhai Ram Singh. Actually, a few months ago, we had a talk all about Bhai Ram Singh. And so if anyone is more interested, they can look at our other talk on Bhai Ram Singh.
Yeah, so his original painting in the Isle of Wight, because he obviously designed the Darbar, which your talk may have been on. He also designed, places in Rawalpindi, the agricultural college, everything in Lahore was Bhai Ram Singh in that period.
Yes.
But they brought his painting to the V&A 2 years ago. There was an exhibition, they bought his painting, loaned it. So again, fascinating. Yeah.
Great, good. Okay, did anyone else have any other question or?
Hi Hello,
Yeah.
thank you very much. That was really very fascinating, especially to know that, just at our doorstep in London, we've got all this wonderful Sikh history artifacts to look at. And you're doing a wonderful job at promoting this. Now, I've only just got one, it's not really a question, or if anybody else could answer. We've got a lot of artifacts from Maharaja Ranjit Singh's time.
Mhm.
Know that Dilip Singh was here with his family. Do we have any evidence at all if his family ever visited the British Museum, for example, to have a look at the grandfather's things, or anywhere else in London?
Yeah, so I think the way we do this is through auction catalogues. So as Dilip Singh was quite well-to-do during his time, he owned his stuff, but in his later life, he started to have financial problems. One or two of his children have the same financial problems. So when we go to Edinburgh and see the artifacts, the provenance to those artifacts is basically they were auctioned off and someone else bought them, and then they gave them to the Edinburgh Museum on their death. So I think what I've learned about princes and Indian states they were rich during the lifetime of their current kings, even with the Kapurthalas, the Patialas, everyone, even the Lahore king, on their pension, they were quite well-to-do. They could travel the world, they had the jewelry, but their children didn't inherit the pension. And then their grandchildren definitely didn't inherit the pension. And so now they just don't have that power and that influence and that wealth anymore. And then they had to auction off these items that we now see in the museums, especially the jewelry. The jewelry, in India, Patiala, Kapurthala, rubies, diamonds, emeralds were standard items possibly. But in the British, they put such a high price on them, and that they were then auctioned. I think the interesting item from our perspective is when that divide comes from something the families made for themselves, which can be auctioned off, that's fine, that's theirs. But when they start to inherit religious items and then they come up for auctions, then I think there's a certain uncomfortable feeling within the Sikh community. If it's Gurbani, if that Maharani Jindan Kaur Gutka came up for auction,
Yes.
then it's very difficult for us to put a price on that, and then you see it leave and go to a collection. That's where I think if it's an earring or a necklace, then it gets auctioned off. Grandchildren get the money, and there's loads of examples. But when it's anything pseudo religious, then I think, and even for me, it's quite difficult because we have a different. If it's anything associated with our gurus, it's even more. But if it's even associated with our history, it's even more, because then that whole description of where does it really sit? The family just inherited it because they were gifted it, or they took over it, took over the land that it was on, and they had no right to auction it then because it probably didn't belong to them. So it's quite interesting. Yeah, I think in my early years I had all these pulls and pushes, to kind of, but I've been over that now. Now I just like to do the tours and talk to people, because I can't change what people feel about who does the Kohinoor belong to. I can just show you there's an expensive way to see it and a free way to see it. I'll just tell you the free way to see it.
Thank you.
Good. So thank you, everyone. As you know, these talks are recorded and will be on YouTube, so you can watch them and share them again. Oh, sorry. Do you want to ask a question?
Govind Pal, yeah, he's got an interesting question. Is Govind Pal still on the call?
Anji, Anji.
I have learned lots of things here. Quite since many years, I am researching about Maharaja Ranjit Singh, Dilip Singh, and I have read a book, and there was written that Maharaja Dilip Singh got a children, Frederick and Sophia. Does they have any children? And
so I think our friend Peter Vance is the expert on this thing, but he had 6 children from his first marriage and 2 children from his second marriage. Some of his lineage from his second marriage still continues, but from his first marriage, the 6 children, it's recorded that they did not have any They did not have any children. So the last passed away in 1952. She's buried in Lahore, Catherine. Peter Bance, who I think Govinda knows very well.
Yeah.
Probably a future talk for you guys. But this Govind Pal has an interesting question, Bobby, if I pick it up in the chat.
Yeah, go ahead.
So he wrote, how can we rewrite our UK curriculum to be less Eurocentric and colonial so that Sikh and Punjabi history is known and taught to the diaspora and wider British student community at school from a fundamental formative age? This, I've kind of struggled with this myself because I've been a product of the Eurocentric World War I, World War II history, curriculum. I feel it is very, very difficult. Maybe with the way the world is going, that colonial history will be taught in a different way. Not so. The materials need updating, the access needs update, everything needs updating to the 21st century, because you cannot, even the books, the first book you'll read on Sikh history, they'll be written by people 100 years ago, and the narrative has moved on, the research methods have moved on. So I think it's a big challenge for all of us. But the reason I call it a little history of the Sikhs, if a lot of us do a little bit, then we can maybe start to challenge it, and start to work our way through the mountain ahead of us. But we've got to start somewhere. We've got Sikh schools now. We've got, higher studies in Sikh studies in universities appearing. Or Wolverhampton now, Birmingham have a Sikh chair. Oxford and Cambridge offer Sikh history type.
But saying that, actually, when I think back to my O-level history, which I did, we had a chance to do a project of our own choice. Yeah. So I chose to do the last 100 years of the British Raj. And so back then, a long time ago now, so I was able to do that research. And as you say, it was all from the history books that were available at the time, that were obviously all written by mostly British people. Exactly. But yes, I mean, at least it introduced me to the topic. And so where there are projects that people can choose doing their GCSEs and A-levels, we should really encourage people to choose these kind of topics.
And that's exactly what I say to my school visits. If your teacher gives you any opportunity, pick it up. Sophia, Dalip Singh's, your own grandparent stories, anything. Yeah. Don't give up the opportunity, because you're putting it into structure.
Yeah, good. And I think there was one more. You had one more question?
I think Benji, who was talking
earlier, yes.
She had one more question. Yeah.
Yes,
जी जी मैं पंजाबी च गल करां इस बेटर होएगा ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼
ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਕੋਈ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਚ ਕਰ ਲਓ ਗੱਲ
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜਾ ਦਲੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੇ ਹੋਰ ਗਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਮੈਂਬਰ ਚੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਥੇ ਹੋਰ ਰਹਿੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਜਾਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਖਤਮ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਨੇ ਐਕਸਪਾਇਰ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਨੇ
ਜਿਹਨਾਂ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਜੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਤੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਮ ਲੋਕ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਦੀ ਮਿਲ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਰਾਜ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਸੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਜਾ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਦਾ ਐਂਡ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਕੁਝ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਜੋ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਜੋ ਸਾਰੇ ਜਗਤ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਲਾਈਕ ਇਨ ਇੰਡੀਆ COVID-19 ਜਿਹੜੇ ਅੱਜ ਦੀ ਸੱਤਾ ਸਰਕਾਰਾਂ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ ਬਿਹੇਵ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਬਟ ਮਹਾਰਾਜਾ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਦਾ ਰਾਜ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਰਾਜ ਕਦੀ ਅੱਜ ਤੱਕ ਨਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਕੀਤਾ ਤੇ ਨਾ ਉਹੋ ਜਿਹਾ ਰਾਜ ਕਦੀ ਹੋਣਾ ਹੈ ਪਰ ਐਜ਼ ਏ ਸਿੱਖ ਹੋਣ ਦੇ ਨਾਤੇ ਮੇਰੇ ਮਨ 'ਚ ਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਪੜ੍ਹਿਆ ਸੀ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇੰਝ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਆਈ ਵੁੱਡ ਲਾਈਕ ਟੂ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਮੈਂ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲ ਸਕਾਂਗੀ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਸਾਡੇ ਰਾਜ ਦੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਰਾਜਾਂ ਦੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਸਨ
Yeah, actually, as Rav's just said, pretty much the line of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, Maharaja Dalip Singh, direct line seems to have ended, but so that's my understanding. But actually, I remember the story when growing up, the story that I was told actually is that before Guru Gobind Singh passed away, he made a commandment that no one should build a monument to Guru Gobind Singh, otherwise their whole family will be finished. And obviously Maharaja Ranjit Singh built so many gurdwaras in Guru Gobind Singh Ji's honor, and and that was one story that I heard when I was growing up.
So Bobby, that story
because Maharaja Ranjit Singh built these gurdwaras in honor of Guru Gobind Singh, then his line finished. So that was one story that I heard growing up.
Yeah, and then when Queen Victoria also brought in the children, she was their godmother and said, you know, none of you will be married, you know.
Yes.
So that's it. So, but these are part of our oral storytelling history, you know, that, you know, our younger generation still need to know this stuff. But because of the internet and books we have online and etc., we can build more knowledge around it as well. You know, but we've had the same stories. But, you know, Benji, you can go and see Maharaja Dalip Singh's grave. You can see Prince Frederick's grave. Sophia Dalip Singh had her ashes scattered. She was cremated at Golders Green Cemetery in London, and her sister Catherine is in Lahore. She's buried in Lahore. You know, if you want to feel the connection, you can still go to Thetford. Kafi kuch ਉਹਨਾਂ ਕਈਆਂ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਯਾਦਾਂ ਰੱਖੀਆਂ ਨਾ, ਕਈਆਂ ਕੋਲ ਸਮਾਨ ਹੈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ, ਕਈਆਂ ਨੇ, and Peter Bance, who you know has got a good collection, he would be probably more than happy to speak, you know, to you guys in around the stories.
जी एक माफी चाहने एक और गल quite interested program होने मिलिया सी, that's why I have joined. मैं पूछना चाहनी है कि जिदा साडे स्कूलों ਵਿੱਚ ਬੱਚੇ ਪੜ੍ਹਦੇ ਨੇ, ਐਜ਼ ਹੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਬਜੈਕਟ ਕਰਿਕੂਲਮ ਸਕੂਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਇਹੋ ਜੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦੱਸੀ ਜਾਏਗੀ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਰਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, ਸਾਡੇ ਕਈ ਬਜ਼ੁਰਗ 1947 ਤੋਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਰਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਪਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਕੂਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਸਕੂਲਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਵਿਚਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਸਾਡੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਹਾਰਾਜਾ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੇ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਬਾਰੇ ਕੁਝ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ।
ਦੇਖੋ ਭੈਣ ਜੀ, look, ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪ ਦੇਖੋ 10 ਸਾਲ ਸੇਵਾ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਸਕੂਲਾਂ 'ਚ, you know, it's down to our ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਸਕੂਲ teachers. ਜੀ ਮੇਰੇ ਕੋਲ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਕਿਤਾਬਾਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ 'ਚ ਵੀ ਹੈ, ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਹੈ, ਉਰਦੂ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਬਥੇਰੀਆਂ ਕਿਤਾਬਾਂ ਹੈ ਇਸ ਬਾਰੇ, ਹਨਾ, ਲਿਖੀਆਂ ਗਈਆਂ ਹੈ। ਤੇ it's down to our teachers to say ਅਸੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਪੜ੍ਹਾਉਣੀ ਹੈ, ਅਸੀਂ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਪੜ੍ਹਾਉਣੀ ਹੈ, ਤੇ ਨਾਲੇ ਥੋੜਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਵੀ ਪੜ੍ਹਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ। It's not down to one or two individuals to tour the country, you know, going to Punjabi schools. I've tried it, Benji. It's very, very difficult, you know. So it's down to, you have Punjabi schools, we have now Zoom, we're trying, but we just need numbers. You don't have to know everything. Booka choi slides bana ke ja sade to board kar lo slides, we distribute them quite freely for Punjabi schools. Put the pictures up like I do, put the picture up, just tell the story. De bachche nu pata laguga.
Okay, Ji. So thank you, everyone. It's been, as you, I'm sure you'll all agree, fascinating talk. And we have many, many more other talks that are available on our YouTube channel. So please do subscribe and like the channel. That way more people can actually see the videos that we produce. And once again, I'd just like to thank Rav Singh for his wonderful presentation, and hope to see you all very soon at our next online talk. Thank you, Ji. Sat Sri Akal.